Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your host, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Betsy Fentress.
And we are so excited to have Father Thomas Petri back with us today, one of the many Dominican friars we turn to when our culture seems to really go awry, which seems like always. Father Petri spent years at the Dominican House in Washington, D.C., and he is a familiar face and voice on EWTN and is currently back in his hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, serving at St. Louis Bertrand Church. He's also a missionary of mercy. Father, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
It's always good to be with you, Betsy, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
So, Father, we recently celebrated the Feast of St. Dominic. That's a feast that's dear to my heart as I have a Dominic, and he was known as the Hound of our Lord. And we'd love to talk to you about your vocation story. So tell us about how it is that you came to choose the Dominican order and your love and affection for St. Thomas Aquinas.
I always sort of knew or had a sense, even as a child in Catholic school, that I wanted to be a priest, and it seems that God was calling me to be a priest. I entered actually diocesan formation to be a diocesan priest. You know, there are two ways to be a priest in the church, either a diocesan priest, where you're normally just a parish priest connected to a bishop, or a religious priest in some religious order. Frankly, the religious orders, when I was 17 years old, seemed too complicated to discern or figure out. So I entered formation to be a diocesan parish priest when I was only 17, so right out of high school. And I was very close to ordination. I was with a very small diocese here in Kentucky, the Diocese of Owensboro. And I was very close to ordination, maybe 2 years from being ordained a priest. And it was during that time I started to realize many things about myself and also my desires before God. So there were negative reasons I chose, what I would say negative reasons. I chose the order and of preachers, the Dominicans, and very positive reasons. Although the negatives, I say they're negatives because they were more or less reasons why I knew that I wasn't called to be a diocesan priest. And those reasons were things like, most diocesan priests do live alone, especially in a diocese in Kentucky. And I think as I was starting to grow older, I realized I wouldn't do well in that kind of life. I needed to be in a community of other priests. And also, I really did value the intellectual life or the academic life, the study. And diocesan priests, while they receive wonderful formation, more or less, depending on which seminary they go to, study for them is not the principal aspect of their priesthood or their ministry. And for me, I had fallen in love with the thought and theology of St. Thomas Aquinas in my seminary studies. And I couldn't imagine being a priest where studying the mysteries of God just wasn't a part of my life consistently or a foundational principle. And then I found the Dominicans through that. That's how I sort of knew I wasn't called to be a diocesan priest, but I was called to religious life, and particularly as a Dominican. Because for Dominicans, study is not something we engage in simply to have something to do or even as a penance. For us, the study of the mysteries of God are, in fact, for us, the worship of God. God wants to be known, and he wants his mysteries to be known. And that's part of the beautiful thing of being a Dominican and being someone who just enjoys theology and studying is like you get to learn so many wonderful connections because God is infinite, and not everything that we learn in the catechism or even a basic theology course is enough. There's always more to be learned, more connections to be made. For the Dominican, our motto is contemplare aristrate, right? To contemplate, which study is part of contemplation, and to hand on the fruits of that. And that, for me, was always, when I first entered seminary, was always something I looked forward to doing, sharing some of the insights that I was getting in my studies and figuring out how to translate them, for lack of a better word, into language that the average layperson in the pews or in a parish or in a college class or in a graduate class can understand and really receive spiritual nourishment from. And so that's really what drew me to the Dominican order. And of course, the fact that we live in community. Even here at St. Louis Bertrand, it's a very active parish. We have 6 weekend masses, 2 weekday masses every day. We hear confessions every day for an hour. There's always at least two priests hearing confessions. Sometimes it goes longer than an hour. We often have lines. And it's just wonderful to be able to minister and to exercise my priesthood outside in the world and in the parish, but also to have that strong community of like-minded, called priests. So there's 7 of us who live here in this priory, and 4 of us work exclusively with the parish. And we have one friar who is semi-retired. We have one who is the Catholic chaplain at the University of Louisville, and another who teaches at a Catholic school here in the city of Louisville. So it's a very full life and very content life for me. I'm very happy that the Lord called me. I know that I would not have been as happy and as fulfilled as a priest had I remained in the diocesan priesthood. For some men, that's the life that God calls them to, but it wasn't the life he was calling me to.
So before you came to Louisville, or came back to Louisville, I should say, you spent many years at Providence College, and which seems to fit with what you just said about wanting the intellectual life and studying
Mhm.
St. Thomas Aquinas. Talk about those years that you were there and what it was like to be a campus minister, because it seems like the Dominicans are more and more, I mean, in Indiana, they're just on fire at Purdue and IU. What
Yes.
strikes you most about being there?
Well, part of that, I mean, Providence College, it was also providence in my own life, my divine providence. Because I had been in diocesan formation for so long, I had pretty much all the degrees that a priest needs to have to be ordained. But just because you are 2 years away doesn't mean you can join an order and get ordained in 2 years. Because when you join an order, you have to be a novice first, you have to be in simple vows first, you have to then be in solemn vows. So I was in formation, but they didn't quite know what to do with me academically. So while I was at the Dominican House of Studies, which is our seminary in Washington, D.C., which is its own pontifical faculty, its own school, but it's also right across the street from the Catholic University of America, they had me pursue a doctorate in theology while I was still being formed to be a priest. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was ordained, I already had then a doctorate in moral theology. So my first assignment was as a professor of theology at Providence College. And because I entered seminary at 17, I had never had the sort of college experience most young people have. I certainly never on a co-ed campus. I went to a college seminary, the Pontifical College Josephinum in Columbus, and then graduate seminary at Mundelein in Chicago. And I loved it. I was only there for 4 years, and it was a great first assignment for me. I love being part of young people's lives, because in college is when you're figuring out who you are and what you're going to be in life. And it was wonderful as a young priest to be around young people, teaching them the faith. I have several students who went on to become religious friars and Dominican sisters. And in fact, this weekend, I'm actually celebrating the wedding of one of my students way back then. He's getting married. And so that's absolutely wonderful. And it was, I hate to use the word intoxicating because of the baggage it has, but there is something vibrant and life-giving about living as an adult and as a professor on a university or college campus, especially in New England with those dark, cold winters. I always looked forward to the first beautiful day of spring because there's a lot of green at Providence College in Rhode Island. And it'd be the first day, like all the students would be on the green, studying, having picnics, playing frisbee. And it was we had all gone through this New England winter together, with feet of snow and cold. And here was this beautiful day. And I think it was the first time I ever in my life experienced spring as really the burst of something fresh and new. And of course, the wonderful thing about being a professor, and this is true whether you're a priest or a elementary school teacher, is you still get to live as an adult that wonderful feeling on the last day of school that summer is finally here. academics are really spoiled. We get to live that summer freedom, every May, just like school children do.
So, Father, when I think of the Dominicans, I think of three things. I think of devotion to Our Lady. You're known for wearing the rosary and for really inculcating a devotion to the rosary. I think of teaching and studying, and as we've discussed. But then I also think of taking heretics to task. I feel like St. Dominic was known for being a very forceful voice against heresy in his time. Can you talk about how are Dominicans today? I mean, our culture is just so adrift, and even Catholics are in many respects poorly catechized or don't have so many misunderstandings about the faith. And maybe we can, talk also in the context of this terrible situation out of Massachusetts where you have a self-professed Catholic governor signing a horrific late-term abortion bill surrounded by people smiling and clapping. So what are the Dominicans doing today in the modern world with technology and things like that to confront confusions about the faith? And then maybe you can help us think about how Catholics are supposed to process something like what we just saw.
No, that's a good question. It's really kind of two questions, but as
Yeah.
you note, Ashley, really connected at the root.
Yeah.
St. Dominic was, and he started the order because there was a widespread heresy at the time, the Albigensianist. And that sort of thought of the Albigensianism still kind of is in a lot of Christians, even a lot of Catholics, but it basically was the idea that that Christ was not really God, that our world is so evil that God could not, in fact, become incarnate, could not touch it. And so, the legacy of that is all of these thoughts that come periodically even into the Catholic faithful, that the body is evil, that everything that goes on around us is evil, and we just need to escape this evil world. And as you note, Ashley, there's a lot of reasons that is an attractive thought, in today's world, but it's not the Christian thought, right? God is incarnate in Jesus Christ, and his creation is good. It's sin and evil that pollutes it. The Dominican charism really still is about preaching with conviction the truth of Jesus Christ, the truth of the mysteries that God has revealed about himself. And in revealing the mysteries about himself, revealing mysteries about us, right? Gaudium et Spes 24, which was St. John Paul II's favorite line, that Christ not only reveals God to man, he reveals man to himself, right? So St. Irenaeus of Lyon, that wonderful line that the glory of God is a man fully alive. Of course, heresies are still rampant, not just heresies about God, but I think more in today's world, heresies about the human person and what the human person is and what we're made for. The word heresy, of course, has a lot of baggage. And so I think rather than use the word heresy, I tend to use the word confusion. There's a lot of confusion in the world about the nature of the human person, the nature of men and women, the nature of God. And we might not be, thankfully, doing inquisitions anymore, but the Dominican charism is still to bring clarity to Catholics, as you rightly note, who aren't well catechized. And there's obviously, we could have a whole discussion on why that happened and how that happened. But to bring clarity, and we do that in a number of ways. I'm a member of the Eastern Province of the Dominicans here in the United States. We're the oldest province of the Dominicans in the United States. And we do that, of course. Providence College is one of our flagship. We run that college, that university. We have about 45 Dominicans on that campus. As far as priests active on a college campus, I am willing to say we have the most priests active on any Catholic college campus in the United States. Everyone thinks of Georgetown, and Georgetown does have a significant community of Jesuits, but most of them are retired and are not active actually in the lives of the students. We do that obviously through our teaching. We have parishes. When you go to a Dominican parish, and I know our parishioners here at St. Louis Bertrand, you're getting a very different experience of parish life than when you go to a diocesan parish, not just in the preaching at Mass, but in the extracurriculars, adult education. In fact, I'm starting an adult education lecture series in a couple weeks here, and we usually get 60 to 70 people participating from all over the city. I'm calling it The Secret Life of Grace, how grace works in us when we don't even know it. But one of the big initiatives we have in the province is our Thomistic Institute, which is an institute of the Dominican House of Studies. We have chapters on various campuses throughout the country and internationally. And these are student run, and it's well endowed. Our fundraising is really good. And we basically bring in Catholics from all sorts of professions and fields, not just theologians and philosophers, but scientists, and to give lectures to young Catholics who want something more intense and more fulfilling intellectually than they usually get at a parish, or sometimes even in the Catholic campus ministry. I think this has been one of the problems of catechesis is the church treats young people and parishioners as, when it comes to matters of the faith and matters of ethics and morality, as though they're grade schoolers, when adults are running complicated lives outside of the parish. It's complicated to be an adult, and that's even apart from whatever career you're living and engaging in. I used to, even when I was a young seminarian, I would say to pastors and DREs, that our students are in high school, they're learning calculus and physics. And when they come to CCD or they come to youth group, you're treating them like they're fourth graders or third graders. They can handle complicated intellectual, theological conversations and what we know now and what polling shows and what we're experiencing, and I know you all have talked about this, what we know is that that's what young people want, and that's why they drift away, is because they're not getting fed intellectually. And I think that's one of the great things that the Dominicans do. And if obviously I'm biased on this matter, but I do think that this is a Dominican moment, in the sense that this is a moment when the lay faithful, because they're not getting it necessarily from their parishes, from the priest, from the bishops, not always even from the bishops, which was exactly the same situation in the 13th century when the Dominicans were founded, exactly the same situation. And St. Dominic wanted his band of brothers to be university educated, thick in their preaching and contemplation. And we were the first priests to study at universities, of course, were new. They didn't come around until the 10th, 11th century. We were the first priest of the church, among the first priests to go to university and study, like the fields of knowledge. And I think that's where we are. And I think when you see politicians like Governor Healy in Massachusetts, self-identified politicians, one is just a very poor understanding of the faith, not just intellectually what we understand about the human person, but also a very poor formation of conscience and morality and this is across the board, whether you're Catholic or not, in American politics, that we've gotten away over the last 100 years or so from politics being about us voting for persons of character who have values that they will hold to, and that we accept the values that they hold to and vote for them because of those values, even if there are values or opinions that they hold that we may not agree with. We've moved into this situation where politicians often are simply adjusting their stated positions in favor of what they perceive to be the loudest constituency that will keep them in elected office or keep moving them higher in elected office. And the problem with that is that democracy works best, a republic works best when people are having civil, intelligent conversations, trying to find the truth of things, trying to find the right way to go. And I think we can all agree that in our contemporary society, having intellectual conversations like what you and I are having right now has become practically impossible. I mean, it's one reason I'm grateful for the increasingly death of legacy media and the rise of new media and podcast and long-form journalism, where we can have these detailed conversations. But then you have Catholics who are in positions like Governor Healy, and yes, I'm not attempting to excuse that she signed right this horrific bill that takes away the 24-week limitation, allows for late term abortions. It's not even politically smart, because we know that while maybe half of the American population supports abortion, that number starts to fall off precipitously once you get into the second trimester of pregnancy. I mean, the vast majority of Americans do not support late term abortion. And we also know that abortion has become the sacred idol of the political left as the marker of women's so-called rights and certain other political values, that you can't be against it certainly in the Democratic Party, and still move up in the political echelon, move up in the political sphere. That being said, though, it doesn't excuse Governor Healy herself. Regardless of how she was catechized, regardless of how she was formed morally, we believe that the dignity of the human person, the dignity of life, abortion is a matter not just of faith and of religion, but is a matter of human right and natural law, which means we believe, and I could make an argument, that everybody, no matter what they're telling pollsters, knows, they have the hard wiring to know it's wrong, it's gravely evil, regardless of psychologically why they may think this is why. I mean, the people who are for abortion I admire the most are the ones who say, people like Camille Paglia, who says, yes, I know it's taking a life, I just think a woman's right is more important. Okay, I can have a discussion with you on that. Let's discuss that. But the lies that people tell themselves about what's going on in abortion is just that. It's plain mental hopscotch to allow for something that deep down they know is evil, and they just don't want to admit it. But we also believe, because it is natural law, that does lead to effects not just in one's spiritual life, but also in one's psychological life, and eventually in one's physical health too. I mean, and it leads to effects, as we are seeing, in a culture or a society that turns a blind eye to what naturally is evil. What naturally is an evil, just as surely as the Holocaust, just as surely as slavery leads to evils in society. Her soul is certainly in jeopardy. She knows better as a Catholic. She knows better as a baptized Christian. She knows better. Yet, for political reasons, I'm being charitable here. For political reasons, she signs this law. It has effects, I think, on not just her soul. It is a grave mortal sin, and it's publicly so. And while there are in our current church discussions about Holy Communion to these kinds of politicians, um, it really does seem like there is a double standard. If Mrs. McGillicuddy in a parish went on the local news and said she was for abortion, her pastor would be having a discussion with her. And I do know the bishops do try to meet. I know that there are bishops in Massachusetts who have been trying to reach out to Governor Healy. Whether or not she's receptive or even takes their phone calls is a different question, right? But she shouldn't be receiving Holy Communion. Now, whether a priest denies her is tricky, because nothing has been canonically declared by a bishop, by her bishop, or but to receive communion in a state of mortal sin for all of us further compounds the jeopardy to one's salvation. But to do so publicly also raises scandal for the faithful, which is why the Code of Canon Law says they should not be admitted to Holy Communion. But once again, how priests are formed, how bishops handle this, how priests handle this is going to vary depending on the person we're talking about, or what their bishop does or says.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. So we wanted, at the Catholic Association, we try to bring the light of faith to our listeners in the public square. What advice do you have for us, Father, in discussing the truth in a way that can lead others to the truth that is found within our Catholic faith?
I think one of the best ways is certainly by how we live. And, I know the hallmark card phrase from St. Francis that everyone quotes, preach the gospel and when necessary, use words. But I do think as Catholics, when we're living in grace, we're meant to go through life not agitated by everything that's happening in the world or even in the church. We're meant to go through life with a certain disposition of delight. That doesn't mean we don't get angry, we don't get upset, we don't get sad, we don't suffer. But it does mean that we understand that God has won the victory, that God is truth, that God is mercy and love. And that means we should be going through life ourselves with a certain delight that can't be taken away by these horrific events. No matter how horrific any events happen or how much we personally in our lives and our families, our friends suffer. And I think when people witness that, when they see that, and we all know people like this because we're all, even us good Catholics, are trying to work on that. But we all know people that seem to go through life and nothing seems to like disturb them. And sometimes sometimes we get a little jealous of that and angry. I mean, how can they not be upset by this? And I think when people see that in us, eventually they're going to ask the question, why? And I think when they ask the question, it's St. Peter, right, who says, it's in the first or second letter, be prepared always to give a reason for your hope, right? Always be prepared. And I think we want to cultivate curiosity about how we can how we live this life as we do with everything going on. And it doesn't seem to crush us. And when they ask, we have a reason. And that reason, of course, is Jesus Christ.
Well, I know I always feel more hopeful after spending time with the Dominicans. So, Father Petri, thank you so much. There's about 50 topics we didn't get to, so we'll have to have you back on. But thank you so much for your time and for joining us today and shedding some of your coveted Dominican wisdom with us.
Well, thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Betsy. It's always good to be with you. I appreciate the great work that you're doing. So keep bringing the clarity to the masses.
Back to Conversations with Consequences, now on EWTN Radio. I'm your host, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Betsy Fentress.
And today we are joined by a voice that many of your children and grandchildren know well, Mike Romano, the talent behind EWTN's beloved animated character, Tomkin. But beyond his work as a voice actor and morning radio producer, Mike is a devoted father who has been navigating an extraordinary, powerful personal journey after the loss of his wife, Jen, to cancer. Mike and his 3 kids have shown us what it truly looks like to lean on grace, find joy in everyday moments, and keep faith at the absolute center of family life. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much. Glad to be a part of the show. And it's life is a blessing every single day that I found.
It certainly is. And Mike, you, EWTN viewers and listeners, as we mentioned, they know you as the voice of the narrator of Tomkin,
Sure.
The beloved little redheaded guy who helps kids learn about the faith. Tell us about your journey from having a background in stand-up comedy to ending up as this voice of a popular children's show.
I'd done a ton of commercials, local, nationally, and I was approached by a friend of mine who, very solid Catholic guy, who said that there was an opening at EWTN at the time, and I was praying for an opportunity to use my talents to glorify Christ, and the opportunity came to work with EWTN Radio. I took it, and during my time at EWTN Radio, I also got to do some TV work as well with Teresa Tomeo, Dr. Ray. I let them know that I think the creative department was wanted to do something for children, and I had done some work for animation work for a hospital when I lived in LA as a stand-up comic, and I gave my audition, which started out was since it was a cowboy. The first thing that popped in my mind was the actor Sam Elliott. So I gave my best Sam Elliott impression. Now, here's the thing, Tompkins. Let me tell you something, cowboy. There's a way we do things, and then there's not the way we do things, and we do things the Catholic way. And so they loved it. They loved it. But I think it was a little too much. They wanted to dial it back and just use
Sure.
my regular, speaking voice, because they wanted to avoid kind of scaring kids, because I can see how, somebody like Sam Elliott, you hear him for the first time and you're like, whoa, as a kid that might be a little too much. So we kept it more kid friendly. Went with that approach, and it's certainly been a great learning tool. I've shared it with my children, and they enjoy it. And it's just a great, creative, palatable way to kind of break down the faith for the younger audience, and to teach them about the sacramental life of the church and the moral life of the church, and to get them to think about why we to explain why we do what we do as Catholics, because it's something that we want our children. I want my children to live and breathe the Catholic faith. So it just becomes, yeah, it's just their Catholicism is just part of the air that they breathe, right? So, and I was certainly blessed to have that opportunity and more at EWTN. And I enjoy working with Sam Zamaron and all those guys. At the network. We have a lot of fun sessions. The best sessions are really when we go off script and Sam allows me to improvise. I'll do the script as it's written, and then he'll say, "All right, go for it," and I'll do Tom narrate as Father Mitch Pacwa. See, here's one of the things. Now I know you don't understand what I'm saying, Tompkins, but it's just a dare. So, and then, like Father Anthony, like, I don't understand what you're doing, Tompkins. What you're doing doesn't make sense. We do things the Catholic way. Right. So we have an absolute blast, and I just enjoy entertaining and making people laugh.
Oh, that was really, really funny. So, where did you grow up, Mike, and how did you get into stand-up comedy?
Yeah, I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and when I went to college, I spent 2 years at the University of Alabama. I got a theater scholarship there, and I decided to take my talents out to Chicago. My high school theater teacher recommended I check out Chicago first, because it's a great city for working actors. And then when I graduated from Columbia College, Chicago, I got into doing voiceover work, and one of the first gigs that I did as a voice actor was for MTV Celebrity Deathmatch. I did the voice of this
And
potato con.
throwback.
Yeah, yeah, throwback, right? I did the voice of this potato con who fights this Ginsu chef. Spoiler alert: my character wins. And anyway, so I got into that, and an agent out in Chicago told me, well, if you want to do more animation, you got to go out to LA. So I went out to LA, and I was looking for a job, and I stumbled upon the Comedy Store, and where my name is on the wall there still. So I'm blessed to be a part of that culture, that tradition of great comics. I'm not associating myself with all the greats like Seinfeld and Pryor and all those guys, but to have my name, to have performed where greats have performed, it's an honor and a blessing. And I started out just checking IDs, and then one of the guys asked me, well, hey, do you want to try stand up? I mean, you do different voices and celebrity impressions. So I did. And Mitzi Shore, Pauly Shore's mom, said, let me see what you got, kiddo. So I went up, did a bunch of impressions. Crowd loved it.
What's
And
your
she said,
most famous person impression, would you say?
oh man, probably Stallone, I can Rocky Balboa, I gotta do what I gotta do to fight, I gotta stay alive, I got problems, I gotta fight, you know what I mean? I gotta do what I gotta do. Hey, Eddie Murphy, right? Come on, man, it's crazy, right? Oh, Hercules, Hercules, Hercules. Yeah, it's crazy. I love this interview. And you know what I'm talking about? Hey, come on, Shrek. Oh, donkey, you're crazy.
My husband is a great impersonator, and he's
Yeah.
so good. Now we're in the political world that I have met people that he's impersonated, and it's jarring because you feel like you've met them
You've
before,
met,
or
yeah.
you don't hear their voice. But I remember him telling me once that he realized at a pretty young age it was a skill he had. He said he stood in
Yeah.
front of a mirror and he was just like, name, and then he would do it and do it. Was there a moment when you were younger where you were like, wow, I'm good at this in a way that other people aren't?
Yeah, I loved, I'm sure your husband loved, got up every Saturday morning and watched Saturday morning cartoons. And that's the first thing, you get your bowl of cereal and you sit in front of, the TV and you watch, Scooby-Doo or Richie Rich. And so I remember I would listen to the voices, and I would try it out. And I'd go to school and I'd be like, and then I'd do, Rocky, oh, come on, Scoob, what did you see? And so my friends would be like, oh, wow, that sounds just like him. So that kind of got me, into doing, picking up even more voices, and it kept me from getting beat up and picked on. So I would just, make them laugh. Well, thank God for that skill, right?
Well, it's so nice that you've now married this talent with your faith, which was
Yeah.
really tested with the news that your wife, Jen, had cancer. Can you tell us about how that really tough family moment brought her back to the faith?
Oh, you know, I remember her telling me, because she had fallen away from the faith for some time, and she was in the hospital receiving one of her, what would be one of her many treatments, chemo treatments. A priest, a friend of mine, came into the room and prayed over her, and he had the relic of, I want to say it was what was then Blessed Francis Xavier Sealos. Now he's a saint, obviously. Prayed over her with it. And I remember her telling me something came over her. And it was at that moment, after the prayer, after he made the sign of the cross, she said, Mike, the Catholic faith really is the true faith of Christ. And from that moment on, she started watching more EWTN shows while she was, laid up in the bed. My friend, good friend Dan Burke, was one of the first shows that she saw. And I tell him to this day, I said, man, I thank you for helping to bring, your show on EWTN helped to bring her back into the faith. And so, she started praying. She would start sleeping with the crucifix, which my middle child, Jordan, sleeps with to this day. And I know he finds that comforting. So and we started, and praise be to God, we started going back to church as a family. And so that was a prayer that was answered through the many, Saint Rita of Cassia she's my go-to girl. She's my go-to saint, because turns out she's also the saint of not only difficult marriages, but of, impossible cases, of course, but widowers and widows. She after many years of praying for Jen, that to look over and see my wife and my kids at mass together as a family, and wouldn't you know it, that first day that we went back to mass, that Sunday mass, it was October 1st, 2023, which was happened to be, I think it was a feast day of Blessed Francis Xavier Sealos. And we attended, and still do, my family, my kids and I, we attend now Saint Francis Xavier Sealos. So what a full circle, right? And I'm so thankful, for that, because honestly, the best part of my weekend, or the best part of my week, is that weekend when I look over and I see all of my kids with me at mass. It doesn't get any better than that. It really doesn't.
It's clearly affected your children in a beautiful way. You recounted a story in a recent interview for the National Catholic Register, where you talk about your son and visiting your wife's grave. Tell us the insight that he had when he saw you so sad about your wife, his deeply spiritual insight.
Well, my son will be the first to tell you, and my wife would too, that I had a tendency to be, I guess maybe as an actor, to, over dramatic, and I let things affect me, and I wanted it to be. My kids were clowning around, and I thought they should be more solemn, more respecting. I mean, hey, I know we're in a wide open pasture here, but there's still a cemetery, And he said, you don't have to be so serious, Dad. Mom would want us to be laughing. She would be shaking her head right now, saying, y'all are crazy. And so, you know what? He was right about that. I think that our family, friends, the saints in heaven, they want us to rejoice, because you know what? They're rejoicing in heaven as well. And so, you know, I told my son Jordan last night. I said I was making some tacos, and he was supervising me. And I said, "Well, you should just cook this instead of me." He says, "No, I'm the manager. You're the employee." I said, "God, your mama. She Here's what she had to deal with, and that's how I know your mom is a saint right now. She had to put up with me, buddy. Because I can't. I'm not the greatest cook in the world. Like your mama was a phenomenal cook." He said, "Dad, she's a saint because she's in heaven. Not because she had to put up with you, but because she's in heaven. That's where all saints are. So don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing fine. I'm just helping you out, helping you fine tune the tacos." So it's the whole cooking thing has been a learning curve. My oldest son Donnie is a phenomenal cook. He's been cooking, since he was about 6, 7 years old. I mean, he started out cooking ribs, and he still to this day he'll go out and cook ribs and make a casserole. I mean, you name it. And so I rely on him to help me out, because he'll say, "Dad, what are you doing? You're supposed to let the water boil first before you put in the pasta." I'm like, "Ah, yeah, you're right, you're right." So I feel sometimes like they're raising me. Who's the adult here, right? So I'm super blessed, and I lean on them every day. They really are some great kids. They really are. Jen did a. I give all listen. I give all the credit in the world to my late wife, Jen. She did a
Well,
phenomenal job with them.
we have just a minute left, but tell us the story about the recording and the two of you have. I love that you're in the voice world, and her voice is still.
I So, I work as a radio producer for Archangel Radio, and they had hired me at the time I was freelance. And so they were looking for some prayers, specifically the Divine Mercy Chaplet that they could air at 3 p.m. And so I was in the booth, and I said, "Hey, babe, could you just pray this with me? I think it would sound better, with two voices as opposed to them just listening to me." So she did, and who would have known that 10 years later, mine and her voice would be praying this prayer in perpetuity. I was talking with a friend of mine who came to visit me, and she had turned on the radio, and it was on FM at the time. Or no, it was like, I think it was like Sirius. And all of a sudden, like, I heard my voice. I was like, what's that on the radio? I heard my voice. I was like, are you listening to Archangel Radio? You're starting to listen to Archangel Radio? She said no. I was like, how is it on 1410 AM? Because we're 1410 AM and 94.5 FM. That's our call letters and signal. And I was like, how did it? She couldn't explain how she was listening to Archangel Radio and how it was on the AM dial, because she has to literally push AM on the radio as well as source. It happened to be at 3 p.m. I heard I heard our voices, praying it, and it was just that gentle reminder, and it's a beautiful thing that every time I go pick up my kids at 3 p.m. from school, they can hear mama, and to know that she's with them, that lets them know, it's comforting that they can hear their mama's voice, knowing that she's in heaven now watching over us and praying for us. And so many other people who listen at 3 p.m. can hear Jen, pray with me, and if they have an intention or whatever. I know many prayers have been answered because of our praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet together. It is just like Alyssa said, it's echoes of an angel.
Beautiful. And a foreshadowing of what's to come, that we'll
Yeah,
be
right. It is.
reunited.
It really is. It really is.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing, for giving us some laughs, for giving us a few tears. Where can our listeners follow all your work?
Yeah, they can go to check out archangelradio.com. I'm on there as I'm the radio producer, and I also produce the morning show. We have a show called LA Catholic Morning. It airs from 7 Central to 8. And so get the app and follow me there. And you can also follow me on MikeRomano.net, as well as AdventureAudioBooks.com. I've narrated tons of audiobooks and still do to this day. I do a lot of work for Tan Publishing.
Wonderful. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so very much for the invite. I appreciate it. God bless you and all of your listeners.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences, where I am joined by our TCA chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry, to talk about St. Pius X, who was also a pope in the early 20th century. And a lot of people have a confusion about maybe his role in the very controversial SSPX. Can you give us a landscape for the importance of St. Pius X? And
happy to do so, Betsy. Pope St. Pius X, who was pope from 1903 to 1914, has nothing to do with the Society of St. Pius X, which took its name from him, but it was founded 50 years after he had died. So he's not formally associated with them. One of the reasons why Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society of St. Pius X chose him was because he fought against a heresy called modernism, which in a particular way was trying to interpret sacred scripture by some categories in which we no longer believed in miracles. We no longer really believed in Jesus' divinity. This was a school of thought originating in Germany and parts of Europe that Pope St. Pius X very clearly opposed. And so Archbishop Lefebvre liked that aspect of the pontificate of St. Pius X, and so named him as the saintly patron of what he was trying to do. St. Pius X was canonized in the 1950s, and so he was a very fresh saint when Archbishop Lefebvre was doing a lot of his work in Africa. But who was really St. Pius X? He was named Giuseppe Sarto. He was baptized, which in English means Joseph Taylor. And he was the son of a mailman, and he worked very hard in school. He had to walk a lot because he came from a relatively poor family. But eventually he was able to study to be a priest. He was super smart, was ordained a priest, served in dioceses before he was basically made seminary professor and rector, as well as a vice chancellor of his diocese. And because of all that he had done, he was made the Bishop of Mantua, and he served in that diocese very effectively. Then he was named the Cardinal Patriarch of Venice. And then something happened after Pope Leo XIII died in 1903. There was the conclave taking place, and everybody thought that it was going to go to Cardinal Rampolla. And Cardinal Rampolla was getting close to the number of votes, 2/3 plus 1, that was needed in the conclave. And that's when one of the cardinals put forward a veto from the Holy Roman Emperor saying we didn't want Rampolla. And so there was a huge controversy about whether the Holy Roman Emperor or his successor, because there really wasn't much, it was part of the Habsburg crown, whether he should have a veto. And others on the inside recognized that though Rampolla was close, he probably wasn't going to go over. So they needed a new candidate, and they went for Joseph Taylor. They went for Giuseppe Sarto, the Cardinal of Venice. And he was elected and took the name Pius X. And he was the first pope in centuries who had actually been a parish priest. And he brought that experience of the parish life to the papacy, and he made several reforms. First reform is he started the whole process for the putting together of the Code of Canon Law. Today, for example, Betsy, priests are a little bit confused about certain liturgical things, because if you want to know what the rubric is about using incense, if you want to know what to do when a bishop comes, etc. There are at least 3 different books you've got to consult. And then there are various Vatican documents. There's no one place you can go to. And in 1903, when he became Pope, for all the church's legal stuff, it was in all these decretals and everything else, and you needed to be a true expert to know where to go. And he said, going to be very important for priests and everybody in the church to just have one book, the Code of Canon Law. And so he started the process. It was finished 3 years after he died in 1917. That was the first Code of Canon Law we ever had in the history of the church. It was reformed in 1983 after the Second Vatican Council by St. John Paul II. That's what we still have. But he looked at it of what would have I needed when I was a priest and a bishop, and he started that process. Second thing that he did is he reformed the liturgy. Many people were coming to Mass for the orchestral concert, especially in the big cities where you're playing Mozart Mass or Beethoven Masses, etc. And he said, they're neglecting the Word of God, and they're likewise not even prioritizing Holy Communion and the Word made flesh. So he basically banned orchestral Masses, except for the most august feasts on the church's calendar, so that people would be coming for sacred scripture and the Holy Eucharist much more. And so he very much promoted Gregorian chant, which people could learn to sing, and polyphony. So without a lot of accompaniment, some of the beautiful stuff of Palestrina over these huge orchestral Masses. You know, sometimes we have to ask the same question when we're sort of celebrating Mass for our young people. Are they coming more for the rock band that plays at the Sunday night Mass? Are they coming more for the praise and worship music that they love? Or are they coming essentially for God? We're very happy for them to show up, but we need to make sure that we're helping them make a transition to what's way more important than excellent music. Third thing he did, which we should all be grateful for, is he lowered the age of First Holy Communion. Most people at that time were receiving Holy Communion sometime between 12 and 18. St. Therese, for example, made her first Holy Communion, I think it was the day before her 11th birthday. And he said, as soon as we reach the stage in which we can distinguish between bread and wine and Jesus after the consecration, then we're capable of receiving Holy Communion. We obviously, if we're going to have that type of discernment, going to be capable of examining our souls and going to confessions and things first. But he lowered the age down to the age of reason. When we talk about the age of reason, most of us think, well, that means when we're in second grade and when we're 8. No, the kids can reach the age of reason well before 8. 5 and 6-year-olds sometimes can reach the age of reason. That's what St. Pius X did. As soon as we're capable of examining our conscience and going to confession, and as soon as we're able to understand that there's a miracle, a double miracle that takes place at the altar when the substance of the bread and wine turn totally into Jesus, and when the appearances of the bread and wine remain, so that we wouldn't be disgusted when we eat Jesus' flesh and drink his blood. As soon as we have that capacity to understand the miracle, then we're able to receive Jesus. And so thanks be to God, because most of us have received Jesus when we were 7 or when we were 8, and we were able to really begin to build our life on Jesus at that young age. And so as a great pastor as he was, that's what he sort of bequeathed to the church. He was a pope who led us to pray during World War I and the destruction that took place. His leadership at the beginning of World War I led to the election of Pope Benedict XV, his successor immediately after. And I like always to say about St. Pius X that the first diocese he ever founded in the world was the Diocese of Fall River, Massachusetts, my own diocese. And so during my first year as a priest, I was back in Rome to complete some academic studies. I had a chance to celebrate Mass on the tomb of Pope St. Pius X 105 times. And so each of that time I was praying for my bishop, for my brother priest, for all the faithful of the Diocese of Fall River. And so it's a very special place for me whenever I return to St. Peter's Basilica to go over to the tomb of St. Pius X and continue that prayer.
What a great connection to a great saint. Thank you so much, Monsignor Landry.
God bless you, Betsy.